a second. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to, whoa, hello, whoa. Can everybody see me?
Yes.
I can.
Okay, hold on. Okay, there we go. Forgive me. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this morning for this important seminar on how to protect your church against an active threat, hosted by Mayfield Zion and Me Church. We're so happy that you've taken this time to come on and join us. So happy to have Stacy Porter, former federal agent, to lead us in this impactful and powerful discussion. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to mute myself. I'm going to turn it over to Stacy Porter to introduce himself and go ahead and get started. As I mentioned, Stacy, the share screen is on, so it's on you.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and share the screen right now and open up the presentation. All right, got it. All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Sinclair, for allowing me to do this for the group and for your members of the church. Again, as you mentioned, protecting your congregation against an active threat. My background, just briefly, I'll go into that. Tells you right here on the screen, but I spent over 20 years with the federal government. Started my career with the Secret Service. I'm originally from Washington, D.C., but I reside in Atlanta now. So I worked for two former presidents, and then after 9/11, I was working at the White House when 9/11 occurred. Former President Bush created Department of Homeland Security. So I transitioned over there because I wanted to ensure we never have another attack on our homeland. So during that time, I had an opportunity to travel the world, do risk assessments on our nation's airports. So if you travel to an airport, most likely did an assessment on that airplane, and as a supervisor. So in 2018, I retired, going out assisting churches. And of course, now it's not changing for me. Sinclair, give me a few minutes. It will not change slides now. Let me try this right here. There we go. Sorry about that. All right, I wanted to start out with this question right here. Houses of worship soft targets. Soft targets at crowded places are increasingly appealing to terrorists or bad actors. The reason for that, they get more bang for the buck. We've seen numerous times, as I mentioned earlier on 9/11, we just celebrated the 20th anniversary of 9/11. They got more bang for their buck. We saw that with the Twin Towers, the Pentagon, and the aircraft that was taken down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Also with the Boston Marathon. Again, that was a large, crowded event, and, the bomb went off, and, it just caused a lot of havoc, if you will. So they want more bang for their buck, and, your malls, your stores, your churches are soft targets. And this question right here, I want to pose to everybody. Does your congregation need a plan? Think about this question as we move along in the presentation, and we'll entertain this if you guys have any questions. So something to think about, does your congregation need a plan? I wanted to throw out some case studies. Right now, we've been dealing with this pandemic for over a year, and many of our church doors have been closed and they're starting to open up again. And one of the things we have to think about when we open up the doors, just bringing everybody back into the church, it's pretty much like we have to start all over again, if you will, meaning, we can't just open up the church. We have to put some safety measures in place, because before the COVID pandemic occurred, we were focused on the active threats in the church. But once the COVID pandemic hit, that all shifted to, okay, how can we put safety measures in place to ensure the safetyness of our congregation when it comes to this virus, which is important, but we also have to continue to think about the active threat. So moving forward, I want to throw out some case studies here. And again, we can entertain that as we move along. I don't monitor. I'm not going to be monitoring the chat box. So Dr. Sinclair, if you have any questions in the chat box, feel free to, advise me if we have any questions on that. This first one I want to point out, in 1999, a large church out in Texas. Don't remember what part of Texas, but you had 150 teenagers at a church singing hymns. This suspect entered the church and shot 14 people. He ended up killing 7 people, injuring 7 before killing him, and injuring another 7 before killing himself. March 12, 2005, again in Wisconsin, suspect opened fire on congregation, killing 7, wounding 4 before taking his own life. He was described by the people that knew him as a normal guy. And this is always the case. Anytime something like this happens, and you start interviewing people, in the church or in the neighborhood or someone that knows the individual, that's some of the things that they'll say is that this person seemed normal. They did notice some things, but it was never reported. So that's one of the things you have to be mindful of is how do we report incidents? 2007, December 19th, this happened in Colorado. Suspect was asked to leave youth center. And a lot of times it all depends on how you approach individuals. A lot of times people do their research, if you will, on when things are going on in the church, what time of day it's happening. So again, your approach is very important on how you approach people, how you talk to them. So that's something you have to keep in mind if you're going to approach an individual and ask them to leave your church. But again, this person was asked to leave. They returned, open fire, killing 2 and injuring 2. 35 minutes later, he went to a church, again, as I mentioned, and killed 2 people. So again, I don't know the outcome of this, if this person was combative and they asked him to leave, but obviously the outcome wasn't great. And depending on how their approach was as well, having this individual leave the church. 2009, again, a suspect walks into a church and shoots the pastor dead point blank. And we've heard about, several stories. I know some time ago, there was an incident at Creflo Dollar, I believe, not in the church, but on his church grounds where an individual was shot. I don't remember if the individual was killed, but I know the individual was shot. And a lot of times, again, we don't know what's going on in the households of individuals, and that whatever's going on in the household, they're bringing it out into the church or into the environment, if you will. So again, a lot of times there may be some type of domestic issue going on, especially now with everybody being at home and working from home. We don't know what's going on in the household. So just be mindful of that. Again, just having a plan in place. How do you bring your congregation back to the church safely? This was a temple in Wisconsin, another incident that occurred in Wisconsin. Again, because we're pressed for time, I'm not going to focus too much on all these. I just want to throw out a few case studies. 2013 incident in Ohio. This was during the Easter service right here. And we all remember this incident right here in Charleston, the incident that occurred there. Again, this was on a Wednesday, I believe, where they were having a Bible study, and this young man walked in and was able to walk out. I know we all have our stories about this, how the police treated this individual, but again, this incident occurred on church grounds. This is the last one, current one that I wanted to place in here, but there actually was another incident that occurred in August 16th of this year in Kansas City. You had a church feeding the homeless in the basement, and an argument ensued, and the individual was shot. The individual was not killed, but here you have a church doing what they normally do, outreach program, if you will, for the homeless, and they were feeding them, and all of a sudden the incident occurred and the individual was shot. The church did shut down because the pastor wanted to put some safety and security measures in place before they opened back up the doors. I did not put that slide in here, but I just wanted to point that out. That was our most recent incident, was in Kansas City on August 16th. Just some stats right here. Just wanted to point out, we see Georgia. Now, this may not be accurate. I had this presentation put together sometime the middle of this year. So again, it may not be, a little off a little bit as far as the numbers, but we see Georgia with 4 and going all the way down to New Jersey with 1, total 64 deaths. So this is something that is occurring. I know we look at church as a safe haven, which it should be, but we can't be mindful of incidents that could occur inside of our church, outside on church grounds. Now, moving forward, as we deal with the house of worship, it is accepted that the concept of absolute security is almost impossible to achieve in combating the threat of terrorism. I have terrorism here, but also meant to put forward / bad actors. I don't want people to be tunnel vision as to terrorism. Okay, this is a terrorist attack. Not all the time that someone's going to walk into a church and shoot up. You may have individuals out in the parking lot area, breaking in cars, if you will, or someone that may go into the front office of the church and may try to rob you, or someone left an unattended bag outside. So I don't want you to get tunnel vision on terrorism, but I did put that in there. It is possible to reduce the risk as low as possible. And the two bullets that you see right here, is it possible that your place of worship could be a target of active threat or vandalism or crimes, as I mentioned? We hear about that all the time. As far as the vandalism piece, we have a lot of teenagers or kids, if you will, they get bored. They want to go out and just have fun. And to them, that's fun. It's not fun to us because it costs the church money to fix everything up, as far as spray painting or busted windows. And as I mentioned, people breaking into vehicles. So kids do things out here. And how's your lighting outside of the church? Do you have individuals outside of the church during service or during the time the church doors are open? This may also include having to deal with a bomb threat. What do you have in place in the event someone calls the church and, says there's a bomb threat? That's why I mentioned early, does the church have a plan? And moving forward, worst case scenario, your staff or congregation could be killed or injured and your premises destroyed or damaged, and a no warning, multiple coordinated terrorist attacks. Again, when you talk about terrorist attacks, again, they're looking for more bang for the buck. And it could be a ruse, meaning that they want to funnel everybody out the front entrance of the door. And there you go. You have a bomb attack, if you will. So just be mindful of that. Not all churches will deal with something like this. But I want to throw this in here because we have various Jewish holidays and we have mosque and various things like that. Well, we hear about incidents like this when you talk about bombing of churches. But for the most part, I'm not sure everybody on this call where churches are located, but you have to be prepared for worst case scenarios, if you will. Three bullets that I have right here. Terrorism can come in many forms, not just a physical attack on life or limb. It can include interference with vital information or communication systems. As I mentioned, we don't have file cabinets pretty much anymore. A lot of things have moved over to the technology world. So how can an individual, when you talk about technology in the churches, you have to focus on cybersecurity attacks. So that vital information, your members of the church, that information is in there, and individuals may come in and disrupt that. They can disrupt your technology within the church as far as your communication systems in and around the church. So those are some things to think about as well. Second bullet, some attacks are easier to carry out if the terrorist is assisted by an insider. That's a big, big concern right now in our industry, as far as security is concerned, is the insider threat. We put our faith and trust in individuals so much, especially when we start talking about the churches. And I'm sure many of us on this call, we have individuals in the church that may have keys to everything in the church. All those keys, do you conduct a routine check on the keys? If that individual were to leave the church, are those keys or is that information collected? Do you, scramble or change the security code of the church? So a lot of times we put so much trust in the individual, and it's a possibility that that person can turn into a bad actor. Now, you're faced with insider threat. And the last bullet, terrorism also includes threats or hoaxes designed to frighten and intimidate. And that's also something that terrorists try to do. They try to just frighten people. And, again, with the incident that happened in Kansas City with the shooting, which was big, of course, but the pastor, he made the sound decision that we're closing our doors and we're not opening our doors until we have something in place. Security measures, if you will.
Hey, Stacy, if I could go back to what you just said in the previous slide on point 2, because you've probably seen so much, is it best if you have a disgruntled member who has some type of position in the church, who had keys in the church, is it best just to change the locks and everything? Because I know you can ask for the keys back, but they can always go to a local store and make copies. So with that, is it advisable to one, ask for the keys back, but also to just change the locks? Like I said, this is if you have someone, a disgruntled officer of the church who just leaves.
Well, that's a good question. One of the things I'll do when I come in, doesn't matter if it's church, school, or business, I'm looking at cost-effective ways on how to do business. I don't want to come to your location and say, okay, it's going to cost you $100,000 to get everything fixed. A lot of times you have measures in place and we just have to utilize those measures as best we can. So changing all the locks in the church, you have to look at the cost effective ways in doing that. How much will it cost me to change all these locks in the church? Not only that, they also have special keys where it's hard to duplicate. And that's something that you look at. But one of the things I try to advise when I talk to business folks is, if I'm the CEO of this corporation, yes, I'm going to have a key that accesses everything, but why should, other folks below me have the same type of access that I have? So that's something to keep in mind. So if this individual of the church has a certain key, maybe that key only allows them access to certain parts of the church, excuse me, certain parts of the church. And it may be easier just to change those locks versus changing the entire locking system of the church, because again, that's going to become costly. And you have to look at various security features that you can put in place where, things like that won't disrupt the entire church, if you will. All right, moving along. Again, if your place of worship is to be secure, it is essential that all work you undertake on protective security is undertaken in partnership with the police or your neighbors. Many of our churches that we attend, they're in neighborhoods or close to shopping centers. So when you have those in the areas, you may have law enforcement. Now, law enforcement, they can't just provide security for your location unless you're actually paying that law enforcement agency overtime. They'll do that. And we've seen that at numerous churches where police officers will assist with traffic control. But one of the things you have to be mindful of is reach out to the local police department of your area as far as the church is concerned. What are you doing as far as the community, just to get to know the neighbors, just building that relationship. So when the police officers are out and about, just patrolling the area, they can do a drive-by past your church to make sure everything is okay. But again, if they're going to be assigned to your church, that's something that you may have to pay the police officer to do. And I'm sure many of us on this call have seen police officer directing traffic as far as cars coming and going. I've seen those at many of our larger churches, and that's something that churches will reach out and do with the law enforcement agencies. But you should have a great relationship or partnership with the local police officers and your neighbors in your church area. Right here, FBI says religious-based hate crimes are up 23% in the US. This is a hyperlink. Again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to go to that screen because if I click this, it'll take me to a different screen, but I'll be more than happy to discuss that if we have time at the end. Since 2012, at least 67 people have been killed in a U.S. church, synagogue, mosque, or temple. Those numbers may have changed somewhat. Again, we have incidents that have occurred last year, this year, as I mentioned. Many religious facilities routinely report crimes such as assault, theft, and vandalism. And as I mentioned early on, we don't want to be tunnel vision and think about active shooter. Second bullet right here talks about assaults, theft, and vandalism. So just be mindful of that. That's why I wanted to talk about active threat as opposed to active shooter. Prevention, not reaction, is key to deterring criminals. And we've heard that many times, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So just be mindful of that. We're so reactionary here in the United States. Prevention is key. So let's get out in front of the problem instead of waiting for something to happen before we start putting measures in place. Risk management cycle. And let me move my screen right here. Identify the threats. So we're going to talk about this briefly. Again, 3 bullets that I have right here. Is there anything about your location, about the location of your premises? Is visitors, sponsors, contractors, occupiers, and staff, or activities that would particularly attract a terrorist attack? So that's something to think about. Are we, off in the cut somewhere where we can be a prime target for, some type of active threat? 2, is there an association with high-profile individuals or organizations what might be terrorist targets? A lot of our churches, and you see here in bullet 2 and 3 can kind of go together. Many of our churches, when we have our special anniversaries or something big going on at the church, we want to invite special VIPs in, from top president down to the mayor or down to the governor, if you will, of your area to come in and speak to the church. So when that does happen, do you have security in place, or do you know what's going on? The VIP or the individual that you're inviting to your church to speak, are there any incidents going on, any information that you know about this individual coming to speak? I remember a couple of years ago at my church, we had a prominent judge come in, and we had an anniversary going on, and she came in and spoke to the church. Now, keep in mind, she was a great speaker. She did a great job. But I was just on a swivel. I'm looking around because you're talking about a judge, and this judge, she's tried numerous cases. So an individual could have easily gotten her itinerary, come to our church and done some type of harm or damage to this judge. So, I was looking around, making sure everything was okay. As far as the foyer area of the church, is that clear? Do we have, just being mindful of your area and things like that. So when you have those VIPs come into your church, what do you have in place? Does your location mean you could suffer collateral damage from an attack or other incidents at a high-risk neighboring premises? What can your local police service tell you about crime and other problems in your area? So again, just having that great relationship with the local police department, you should be able to pull up the crime stats in that area of your church and find out what's going on. If not, you may have a police officer come in and just talk to the congregation about, things that may be going in and around the church. Now, some things are on a need-to-know basis, of course, but a lot of times we see this with schools. When you have an incident, a robbery or something like that happen at a shopping center, the first thing a school will do is lock down because you don't want that to trickle down to the school. So that's the same thing with your churches. If you have an incident that's occurring at a shopping center or in a neighboring area, what do you do, or what do you have in place? Do you lock down the church and make sure everyone in the church is safe and sound? Again, moving on with this, protecting and identifying your vulnerabilities. Your priorities for protecting should fall under the following categories. People, that's first and foremost to me. How are we protecting our staff? How are we protecting the visitors, contractors? Doesn't matter. People are number one. Physical assets, that's the building, contents, equipment, and plans. So again, it all depends as far as the lighting on the outside. Do you have a patrol on the outside doing church service when you have something going on? We all know on the first of every Sunday, usually that's when church is mostly crowded or major holidays. And again, people are doing their research. They know, okay, I've driven past this church several times and I noticed that seems like every first Sunday is when there's a large crowd of people inside this church. So, this may be a prime opportunity for me to go over and see which doors are unlocked. How can I get into this vehicle and, do what I need to do? Third bullet, information. Again, that goes back to your computer system, communication systems, electronic and paper data. Cybersecurity is big in our country today, and that's an ongoing issue. It's not going to go away. It's here to stay. And the last one, processes, supply chains, critical procedures, the actual operation process, and essential services required to support it. So just keep those in mind. And again, people will always be number one, because without the people, you're not going to be able to do anything. But we also have to be mindful of, the type of people that we can trust as well, because you can put, as many measures in place as you want, but if it's always the human factor that's going to cause the disruption. Continuing on with this, all integrated approach to security is essential. This involves thinking about physical security, information security, as I mentioned, that all ties into your cybersecurity. And the second one, there is little point investing in costly security measures if they can be easily undermined by a member of your staff or by a lax in recruiting processes. So again, as I mentioned early on, you want to be mindful of how much money you want to spend. I'm a tech guy. I love technology. You come into my house, you're going to be on camera. But again, you want to be mindful of how much you're going to spend. Is it worth me spending this amount of money ensuring that this will work? One of the things I want to bring up real quick is when this pandemic hit, a lot of companies had to close their doors. So what did we see after that? How do we put in, some of the top technology to ensure we're doing temperature checks or we're doing this? That's great and all, but 5 years from now, will that technology still be able to do the things that you're wanting it to do? So a lot of companies jumped on that when this pandemic happened, and companies were trying to snatch it up right away. So just be mindful of the type of technology that you're going to go out and purchase for your church. And the last one here, many of the security precautions typically used to deter criminals are also effective against terrorists. So a deterrent is good. Again, if you see police driving back and forth, by your church doing services, that's a deterrent. It's like, okay, we may not want to look at this church right now because I've noticed police vehicles, on a regular, or this church have a police officer assisting with traffic control. So they may not look at your church. Also, you want to keep in mind, again, most of our churches that we go to is usually open 5-6 days a week because you have something going on in and around the church. So the lighting, how's the lighting on the outside of the church, during the evening hours? Is it well lit? So something like that can be a deterrent. Again, those are little things that, cost effective versus you going out spending all this money on some of the top gadgets. Continuing on with risk management, before you invest, as I mentioned, in additional security measures, review what you already have in place. Again, the doors, are they locked or are they secured during services? Of course, you have to be mindful of the emergency exits. You don't want to lock those because you're going to find yourself liable if people can't get out. But do you want people doing church service coming from the back entrance, side entrance, front entrance? Okay, do you want to funnel everybody through the front entrances once the church services starts? Now, keep in mind, I know most of our churches are mostly filled with elderly, and it's hard sometimes for them to just walk, park in the back. And that's how my church is set up. I'm sorry. Our parking is in the back, and a lot of times people may go to a back entrance, but there are times where you can pull up to the front entrance, and that's where we have our wheelchair ramp. You can drop off there and they can go through the front entrance. So again, while the pastor's preaching, you want to be mindful of, all the doors secured. Can people come in? And that's that element of surprise. Do I want people coming from my back entrance and side entrance while I'm preaching? And all of a sudden it's a haha, I got you moment. So just be mindful of that. And this one right here, if you need additional security measures, make them most cost effective by carefully planning whatever possible. And I'm not going to beat that. We talked about that already. And moving on to the next one. An integrated approach to security is essential. The 3 bullets right here, I know they're pretty lengthy. I'll just kind of breeze through them pretty fast if that's okay. Even if your organization or business surrounding your location are not concerned about terrorist attacks, they will be concerned about general crime. And as I mentioned before, that's really big because your shopping center, there's been a occurring crime rate going on at the local grocery store. So that's a big concern of theirs. Will that trickle down to your church if this convenience store continuously have crime issues going on? Second one, staff and voluntary workers may be unaware of existing security measures. So as I mentioned before, what's your security plan? If your staff and voluntary workers are heavily in your church, working heavily in your church, you want to make sure everybody's on the same page. Example, shortcuts through fire exits. I talked about that before. You don't want to close off your fire exits because you want to keep those open, but you also want to be mindful of how people enter your church. Simply reinstating good basic security practices and regularly reviewing them will bring benefits at negligible cost. So again, it's just a human factor. We all do it. We become relaxed at times where we just want it the fast and easy way, but we also can't let our guard down. We have to be mindful of what's going on in and around us at all times. And this one right here, again, this all falls under the risk management cycle. Review your measures and rehearse and review security and contingency plans. One of the things that we don't do is we don't review and we may not practice. So churches are always conducting meetings on a regular basis. And this is something that you can probably implement. If you have your ushers, that may be part of your security team. You don't have to go out and hire police officers, anything like that. Again, you want to look at cost-effective ways and saving money. So, utilize your ushers, utilize your workers at the church. When you're having your meetings or your monthly or weekly meetings, okay, how can we ensure, safety and security measures and our contingency plans are up to par? Do we need to do anything to practice or ensure things are working properly? The one thing I wanted to point out in red that you see at the bottom is that it should be remembered that the greatest vulnerability to any organization is complacency. And again, I talked about that earlier. That's the human factor. When 9/11 happened, you probably had every law enforcement. They can probably eat for free for a few months because people just wanted to see security personnel around. A few months after 9/11, things just went back to normal, if you will. It's like, okay, we're tired of seeing uniform, or we don't need you around right now. So complacency is something that we can't do. We have to always be on guard. Again, I know we're talking about, houses of worship, but they're soft targets and people know that. So they're taking advantage of this. So just be mindful of that. Dealing with the physical security piece, putting in place security measures to remove or reduce your vulnerability to as low as possible, bearing in mind the need to consider safety as a priority. So again, those are things that you want to do, just reduce the vulnerability as low as possible. This presentation is great that I can present to, houses of worship, but if you don't have a physical or vulnerability assessment done on the church, then you're still going to have some gaps and loopholes. So again, I can come in and talk to your congregation, but if an incident happens, will they know what to do? So this is great that I'm giving you this information, but it's also great to have a vulnerability assessment done on your facility, especially now that churches are opening up the doors again.
Hey, Stacy,
Yes.
have a question for someone asked a question in the chat. Is it recommended for the security team to have a gun during worship service?
Yeah, I get that all the time. I'm not going to sit here and say that a security team needs to have guns. That's something that you have to talk as a congregation. Well, not as a congregation, but your security team and the pastor. The pastor, he or she may not want guns in their church. And I've seen that, numerous times. I've gone to a church and they have signage right there. They don't want guns. You also have to consider the liability of now bringing a weapon into the church. Now, if something were to happen in that church, you can best believe the lawyers, they're going to pick it apart. They're going to look at your shooting records, meaning how often, if this person is carrying a gun, how often does this person go to the range and qualify? Okay, well, let me see this person's range records to see the qualifications. So those are the things that you have to consider. Now, if it's a police officer, which they're human beings just like everybody else, if you have someone that's a police officer or working with the feds as a special agent or something like that, that's what they do every day is carry a gun, and they're a member of your church, then that's a conversation that individual can have with that pastor and say, hey, just be mindful, I do have my weapon. But again, something like that, the agency will look at, okay, were you working for this pastor? Because we didn't know you were working part-time for this church. So that's something that's hard to really answer. That's something the pastor would have to consider. Do they want guns in their churches? Hopefully I answered that for you.
Perfect. If you want to follow up with that, okay, they said thank you. Real quick, if anybody has any questions, anything, feel free to shoot me in the chat, and I will definitely let Stacy know.
Okay. And moving along, again, vigilance is your team. Vigilance of your team, I'm sorry, including cleaning, maintenance, and contract staff and volunteers is essential to your protective measure. Again, everybody's responsible for security in the church. I had an individual at my church one day. We had an anniversary going on. We had visitors there. And I had one of the members of the church, because they knew what I did as far as my career was concerned. This was before I retired from the federal government. Had one of the members come up to me and say, hey, this individual looks a little strange. He has on a coat, and I noticed outside it's a little warm. And I said, okay, I'll keep an eye on him. But they also mentioned that to the ushers as well. So again, just because you're not on the security team of your church, but you still can recognize something that's out of place and report it. So just keep that in mind. As I mentioned, security should be everyone's concern. Staff and worshipers should be encouraged to welcome visitors and look out for suspicious behavior in and around your place of worship. Nobody that I know of, at least, as far as the church is concerned, has turned anybody away. You welcome them into the church, but you also want to be cognizant of what's going on in and around that individual when it's a visitor. So just keep that in mind. Again, you can't build a fortress around your church. I know some churches may have, certain gates, if you will, to enter. Now those gates may be open during services, but once services, is done, those gates are closed, church is secure. But just keep that in mind. Every church is going to welcome our visitors in, but we want to be mindful about what's going on in and around us at all times. Physical security again, access control, CCTV. Many of our churches, they do have cameras, but again, highlighted here in red. Remember that cameras or CCTV is only effective if it is properly monitored and maintained. Cameras are great. I think they're a great tool, but as I mentioned, it's just a tool. It's not going to stop the bad guy from doing what they want to do. However, they're great for investigative purposes because the police or the church can pull tape. Again, as I talked about vandalism early on, you can easily go back and pull those tapes and say, okay, at such and such time, we noticed some individuals doing this in and around the church. That's why lighting is also important as well. So if your lighting's not up to par and you have cameras at a certain location, it may not capture what you want it to capture. That's why, again, having a risk assessment conducted on your facility is so important. Now, as far as monitoring, I know some churches usually have, I call it the motherboard, where they have all their equipment, maybe up in the balcony or on the back of the church. You have an individual there that's working most of the equipment. It's okay to have another individual back there that may be monitoring the cameras during services, or that individual is monitoring the cameras during services. So again, just keep that in mind if you have cameras at your church and you have a monitoring system, if you will, in the back of the church or up in the balcony area where the individuals working all that equipment. They can also probably help out with the camera monitoring as well. Dr. Sinclair, real quick, this goes into active shooter procedures. It may be a little lengthy. I can cover some of this, but I don't know if you want me to dive deep into it, because of the sake of time.
I would say give a kind of brief dive into it, but kind of keep it a little bit brief if you don't mind.
Okay.
Unless people want, let me put this out. I don't want to be dominant. Let me get the consensus. How do people want to take that? You want to dive deep into it or what? If y'all can just unmute yourself and state your answer or put it in.
Yeah, because I think I have quite a few more slides to go through. And again,
someone wanted to know, is it possible that you can email a copy of this presentation?
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll send it to you since you're my point of contact, and I'll go from there. Now, again, this is something that I use for my business, so I'll be more than happy to entertain any questions for anybody that they may have afterwards. But it is being recorded as well, as you mentioned, so they'll have the recorded version as well. But just again, real quick, going into the active shooter procedures, as you look at 3 bullets right here, what is an active shooter? It's an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people. Usually when you have an active shooter incident, a lot of times people, we get tunnel vision. When you talk to an individual about incident, they'll tell you, it took a half an hour, I heard 50 shots, or I heard this or that. So most times when you have an incident, as you see in the 3rd bullet right here, it's often over within 10 to 15 minutes. Now, don't be upset with law enforcement. When law enforcement is called in during an active shooter scenario, even though you have individuals that are injured on the ground, their job is to stop the active threat immediately. So they may come into your location if there's an active shooter and step over individuals just to get to the threat. One thing you want to keep in mind when that happens, or if it happens, I hope it doesn't, if something like this were to happen, you have to keep in mind that the best thing to do is, one, is to hide, and then two, stay as low as possible. Because if I'm a law enforcement and I'm coming in your church and I see bodies up, I don't know if you're the bad person or not. So just stay low to the ground as possible. And their job is to come in and stop the threat as soon as possible. So again, 10 to 15 minutes, and that's usually the stats as far as the active shooter is concerned. Just going into shooters by age, looking at this pie right here. As you can see, Black under 18, ages 19 to 50 years old. That's the largest piece of the pie, 52%. And then the blue is 44%. Shooters by gender. Again, we can't discount females, but look at the disparity here as far as male and female. Pretty high right there. Day of choice, Sunday. And the reason why Sunday is usually high right here, because one, we're complacent. We become complacent. We're meeting, greeting, we're saying hello. And then every church, unless I miss something, every church, I don't care if you're Baptist, Catholic, doesn't matter which denomination you are, when you walk into a church, everybody's facing forward, listening to the speaker. So again, it's that element of surprise, someone coming in from behind the side. And that's why, and that's also Sunday is when most of the members are at your church versus Monday through Saturday. And Wednesday you see is the second highest, because most Wednesdays is usually when people do their Bible studies. Pit of choice on Sunday, again, as I mentioned, during service, because again, that's the element of surprise, and that's when people want to come in and get more bang for their buck. Time of day. Many of our churches usually have a 8 o'clock a.m. Start time. Some maybe a little later, but again, between 8 and 2 is when the time of day is when incidents will occur at your church. You can see right here, 2 to 12. I put 12 a.m., of course. I don't know of a church that has something that late, but usually they may have functions that begin at 3 o'clock after service, a concert or something, anniversary going on at the church. So that's the second highest right there. Shooter outcome again, looking at this power right here, suicide 44%. Again, these are stats. I'm not sure why the numbers are so big right here on some of them, but I know as far as the suicide piece of it, a lot of times when we talk about law enforcement shooters or active shooters occur, we don't want to give them any fame. And that's been something that's happened in the past, where an individual will come in and shoot up a place, and all of a sudden you see their name all over the news. That's what they want. They want their name out there all over the news. And we're trying to limit that in law enforcement. Law enforcement is trying to limit that because you don't want to give that person fame. But a lot of times individuals, they take I hate to say it this way, but they take the coward way out. They'll come in and wreak havoc, and then they'll take their own lives. So again, your plan, again, looking at these bullet points right here, initial assessment, as I talked about, it's very important that you have an assessment done on your church. To promote awareness among your congregation. This is important, not just between your ushers or security members of the church. Everybody should be involved in the awareness process. Preparedness for key staff. That's probably, as I mentioned, your pastor, your staff, and other members that are part of the church working. Recommended course of action, post-incident course of action, evacuation process, and assembly points. Again, this isn't just for active shooter. Depending on where your church is located, you may be dealing with some inclement weather. Do you have a safe house or a safe area at your church where you can take cover in the event of active threat? Post-incident counseling process. Again, I'm not a psychologist or doctor, but people may need, to talk to someone. So that's something to think about. Media protocol. Do you have an area set up for the media or things like that, where someone can be, doing interviews, or do you want just anybody in your church talking to the media? You may have something in place for that, where, okay, it's the pastor that will do the speaking or something like that. And the last one, considerations for armed security. We did talk about that briefly, Dr. Sinclair. Again, that's a tough one to talk about. Does your church carry the necessary insurance to ensure individuals are safe to carry inside the church. I can go get my permit and carry a gun, but that's your church. And you may say, well, I don't want guns in my church. So that's something to consider, as I mentioned early on.
Stacy, I got a question from the other Stacy on here. Um,
Stacy without the E? All right.
yes, feel free to ask the question.
All right.
Hey, my question is, most churches are using online registration to attend. Is this a helpful tool for protecting the congregation?
You said online registration, meaning they have to
Right,
register online?
Right, they have to register before they attend worship service. A lot of churches are doing that because of the COVID situation. So is that a helpful tool in combating, like if you have an active shooter of any type thing like that with your security?
That's useful for the COVID pandemic, because that's what churches are doing. As you mentioned, they're trying to put safety measures in place, because right now, I don't know how you guys churches are functioning, but my church is still closed, and you still have members of my church that are afraid to go inside. So that's probably the reason why they're doing that, just to make sure they're collecting the proper information. But as far as combating an active shooter, that's good for the COVID piece. But you still have to make sure you're, educating the congregation on various things, what to look out for and what to do. So that's why I mentioned early on, having that assessment and talking with the congregation, or having someone come in and talk with the congregation is important.
Great question, Stacy. Now I have a question for you, Stacy with an E. I know Pastor Mayfield Zion, we're a small congregation, so it's easy to have everyone included in the plan. My question is this: for the larger churches, and I'm just going to use, I'm not going to say large, I say for those who have average attendance or average membership of 100 or more, with 100 people, members coming every week, is it best to have everyone included in the plan? And the reason I say that, because you never know who may be in the church, who's there for ungodly reasons. And they may know all of the plans. Should it be just, and I don't, maybe I'm just asking the kind of crazy, should just only major staff members be officers, leaders in the church for the larger congregations? How would you address that? Because I know, you want everybody to kind of understand. But if there's somebody on the inside that's trying to do dirt, they already know all the points, they know the hiding places, they know everything. So how would you address that?
Well, that's a great question again. And to me, it doesn't matter if you have a small church or a larger church. Every church has their security team or their ushers that work closely with the pastor. Now, those are the people that you want to discuss your security plan with. As far as this presentation that you see right here we're doing, this is something that I can present to the congregation, because again, all I'm doing is giving them awareness. So now, once they have this plan or have this presentation that they've gone through, they can say, okay, now I know to go to Dr. Sinclair and report some suspicious activity. But as far as including the entire church into the security plan, no. And you're right on point, because you don't know who is the bad actor, if you will, or someone that's out there to cause some ill intentions, and say, okay, well, now I know I can do this or I can do that because this person gave me all the information. So you want to make sure you have the right personnel involved on the security plan piece of it.
Perfect, appreciate it. And real quick, anybody have any questions real quick? Feel free to chime in.
All right, just promoting awareness among the congregation. Again, just being proactive about engaging your congregation, as we talked about briefly. Larger congregations may want to consider promoting awareness with everyone or by groups. Again, that's something that the church members can decide. Do we want to break them up into groups, or do we just want to bring everybody together? Smaller congregations could consider address their congregation as a whole. So again, it varies depending on the size of the church. As you mentioned, Dr. Sinclair, being a smaller church, you probably can have everybody in the sanctuary and go through this right here. But when you talk about your larger churches, they may have to be broken down into various groups or via newsletters or brochures. That's important. I know every church try to put out bulletin information, but we want to save the earth. Do we want to continuously print out papers and brochures, or just put this information via, as the Ms. Stacy mentioned, having something online that you can fill out and do. Again, technology is important and it's taken over, and that's something we need to take advantage of. So recommended action before any incident, during the incident, and post-incident. These are recommended actions. Again, emergencies before incident, urge congregation to maintain general awareness. That's always key. One of the things I want to point out, everybody, or you have some people that want to be that superhero. So it's important, again, to educate the congregation and if possible, make sure they're reporting the information and not trying to take the incident on themselves. Because again, if they're not part of the security process with the pastor, then your whole security plan can go out the window because you had this individual trying to do it on their own. So again, education and awareness is key. Include recommended course of action such as, get out if safe to do so, run, hide, fight. That's something that's important, especially when you're talking about churches without elderly. We want to make sure they're being as safe as possible. Well, not just them, but everybody. But how do we get them out or get everybody out as safe as possible? Call for help. Many of us have cell phones with us. And one of the things I want to point out, if you're going to hide, and we tell this to our kids, of course, I'm sure you mentioned this, if you're going to hide, make sure that cell phone is on silent, because active shooter, they're not stopping, trying to kick in the door. They're just trying to move and go. But if your cell phone's vibrating or ringing, that's going to give that individual prime opportunity to say, okay, there's someone in this location. Let me go in here. So just keep that in mind. And if it's silent, you may have an opportunity to say, okay, this is the right time for me to call 911 and get someone over here as soon as possible. If you're unable to get out, as I mentioned, hide, make sure it's horizontally, as I mentioned earlier. If the police come crashing in and you're standing up, they don't know if you're the bad person or not. So, get as horizontal as possible. If viable, of course, lock the doors. And this right here, the last piece, if you're going to go face to face, go for the weapon if possible. Again, we hear about sad stories all the time. I don't want my life to be lost or anyone else's life to be lost. But guess what? In order for me to stop this threat, I'm going to risk my life to make sure no one else gets injured. And that's something that, you have to decide, is it now, or do I continue to allow this person to take other lives? So just keep that in mind right there. List evacuation expectations inside your brochure, if you have a brochure. Indicate services available, counseling and prayer time. Cooperation with law enforcement, police may need to speak with witnesses. Again, that's part of the investigative process. That's where they may ask to pull the camera coverage or the footage and, what did you see? So, just be mindful of that. And hopefully they're being mindful as well of the individual that was involved in this, or the individual was part of this, that, hey, they may not be in the right mind, but again, police officers still have to do their job and speak to witnesses and get as much information as they can. Again, this is part of the whole run, hot, fight. I'm sure you guys have seen or heard about this. So, if possible, you want to run. I'm not going to go too much into this. And as you're doing that, make sure you're able to reach out and call 911 so someone can get over as soon as possible. That's why it's important, as I mentioned, what type of relationship do you guys have with the local police department? I know some churches are in smaller towns and you may not have a large police force, but at least you may know that individual on a first name basis and they can come over and assist as soon as possible. Hide, again, this is very important as well. If you're talking about our elderly in the church, it's hard for individuals to run. So the next thing you can do is hide. You may have certain areas at the church where you can hide, lock the door, get low as possible, and hopefully barricade with furniture. You want to do as much as you can so that individual cannot gain access into that location. And this last piece, fight again. This is the person that's going to risk their lives. I hate to say it this way, but one casualty versus 10 casualties is better than anything at all, because again, this individual is not going to allow anyone else to be injured. I don't want to say killed, but they're not going to allow anyone else to be injured. So they're going to risk fighting the person. We saw that right before COVID. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the incident that occurred at the church in Texas. They had an individual, he visited the church several times, but this particular Sunday out in Texas, he came to the church and he shot one of the ushers at the standing at the door, and one of the other ushers who happened to be armed, he stopped the threat immediately before this individual can take out anyone else. But just imagine that you're sitting in church and you see an individual shoot someone, how that would affect you, I don't know. That's why it's important to have, your prayer service and speak to professionals to make sure everything's okay on your end, because I don't want to go into a church and see something like that happen. First thing I'm going to think is, do I continue to go back to that church, or do I just stop going to church altogether? So it's a lot of stuff that can go on with that. But again, this is the last piece of the run, hide, fight. This video right here is a little lengthy. I'm not going to show it, but it doesn't actually deal with the church. This video right here deals with the school shootings. And the reason why I put this in here, because it talks to a couple and what she's dealing with after she dealt with the mass casualty incident. So again, because it's a bit lengthy, and Dr. Sinclair, I will email this to you and you'll have it. But again, it's just a dissertation of the individual telling her story. Again, it's not church related, but I just wanted to show or let people see how after an active shooter, how it can cause an effect on some things moving forward. All right, employing best practices. Not all churches have fences. You may be your back side of your church. I know, like my church, is a lot of wooded area back there, and that's something that they're looking at doing, is placing a fence along the area, gates and signage. Signage is important. Again, I've talked to you early on about going to churches, and I've seen signages at the entrance of the church, no weapons allowed. So again, those are deterrent. As far as the use of double door entry into the main facility, it should be your only public entry. Again, it's great. Some churches have wheelchair access in the back of the church as opposed to the front of the church. But again, what measures are you putting in place once services starts? Now, in the third bullet, many of our churches, we handle funerals, weddings, and various things like that. So of course, you're going to have the doors open or during the services and things like that. But do you have people in place on those doors once you start letting out? So just keep that in mind. Ensure you keep track of individuals that have keys, as we talked about earlier, to access the facility. Personally, again, if you're on the staff, does everybody need to have keys to the facility? And if they have keys to the facilities, can those keys be duplicated? So just keep that in mind. And if they do have keys, how often are you doing a check of the keys? I know when you talk about businesses, they may do a quarterly check and say, okay, let's go through, is this individual still here? Did they turn in everything? What do you have in place? Develop a security plan in the event of an incident. And it's not always, again, don't become tunnel vision and think an incident involves a gun. Just an incident altogether. If someone were to get ill, what do you have in place? If you have to call for an ambulance to come to your church, how do they access it? So those are various incidents and things you have to have in place when you talk about your security plans. Other considerations: have multiple exit points at the sanctuary or event centers. Again, this is for fire code, I'm sure, just ensuring that it's not just one entry and exit point to your church, because you don't want everybody just, congregating, trying to rush out and knocking people down. So you want to have several locations. Maintain staff present inside the lobby during services. I know a lot of times we all, again, complacency is key. We want to hear the word. Pastor, he spoke a great word today, but a lot of times we want to be mindful of what's going on out in the lobby, because once services start again, the doors are closed. So I don't know what's going on the outside of the sanctuary. Maybe you could have like a speaker system out there if the individual want to hear the pastor speaking or the guest speaker speaking. Depending on the size of your church, consider monitoring the parking lot as well. You may have an individual on staff. I know you have to talk about inclement weather. Is it raining? Is it too hot? That person may not be out there the entire time, but they can do kind of a cursory check and see what's going on, because again, deterrent is key. And when people see, oh, there's an individual walking around in a yellow vest, or orange vest, so they have people out here checking vehicles. The last thing you want to do is leave church and lo and behold, someone broke into your vehicle, and now you have to call the police, and that's just added time on that you didn't have to deal with. Invest in low-cost camera system. You don't have to go out and get the latest and greatest technology, but you want to make sure something is pretty clear. I don't co-sign for any particular company, but I know a lot of these companies, like your Rings, your Simply Safe, various things like that, they're pretty high-tech cameras, but they're low cost. Advanced first aid training for key staff. Not everybody need to be trained in this. I don't know if you have, or churches usually have someone in the congregation that can assist with training someone in first aid, and make sure exit signs are installed. That's very, very important. And if they are installed, are they illuminated? Because again, you don't want to find yourself liable because you didn't have exit signs, or they weren't installed, they weren't illuminated. And that's the end of the presentation. This is my contact information right here. Again, Dr. Sinclair, I really appreciate you giving me the opportunity to speak to the members of your church and some members that aren't part of the church. And you guys have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. And if you have any questions for me right now, I'll be more than happy to entertain what you may have.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Stacy. Let's take it off the screen share for a second, and thank you so much for that valuable information. Right now, I want to thank all of you for taking your time out of your schedule to attend. Right now, I want to open up. Anybody have any questions? Any comments? Feel free. Just unmute yourself and go for it.
Dr. Sinclair, this is Reverend Barnett. I just want to say thank you for having this presentation. Really great presentation. I think every church within the district, really throughout Methodism, should have this. Really do appreciate it. One thing I wanted to point out as it relates to when they have an active shooter thing and the law enforcement shows up, if any individuals have anything in their hands, they probably need to just put it away or anything like that, because you don't want law enforcement confusing whatever might be in your hand to be a weapon, especially if you're standing. So, but thank you. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, man.
Thank you,
I
Pastor.
appreciate it. And that's very important, as you mentioned, because in law enforcement, we all know hands are key. Those hands are deadly. And again, if I get a call to, respond to a church or an active shooter, that's the first thing I'm looking at, our hands. Now, of course, I just can't come in and just start blazing everything. I have to process for a second, but it only takes a second. I don't have time. I have to process it quickly. And again, if there's something in that hand, which we've heard horror stories before of shootings where after everything was all said and done, oh, that was my cell phone. So again, we just have to stay horizontal when law enforcement comes in. And afterwards, identify yourself. Hey, this is who I am. Do you need me to help do anything? And they'll let you know from there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That great question, Pastor C. Anyone else have a question and or comment that they would like to bring forth? Going once, going twice. Well, I know I got a lot of information out of this. What we're going to do, because I know this is church. And like I said, I think it really doesn't matter how big or how small the congregation is. Lives are essential. And we definitely need to be, what you say, proactive, not just reactive. So what I was going to do, Sister Sawana just took herself off the video. are you still there, Sawana?
Yes, sir.
Okay, Sawana, can you just close us out in prayer real quick? And I'm gonna see if everything goes well. I'm gonna see if I can put this up on YouTube, and then I'm gonna see if I can send all the information out to everybody. But thank you again, Stacy, man. I greatly appreciate it. Thank you, all of you, for taking time out of your schedule. Thank you, Pastor C. Thanks my pastor, Pastor Flager, for taking time out, and all the members of Mayfield and everyone else who joined. Okay, so Juana, can you just close us out in prayer real quick?
Yes, sir. I too want to thank our presenter for an amazing job and some very important information that we all need. If we may go to my Father's throne at this time. Almighty God, our Heavenly Father, we come before you this morning, first and foremost, to say thank you. Thank you for an opportunity to assemble together this morning. Father God, we want to thank you for a day we've never seen before, and when it's gone, we'll never see it again. Thank you for the assembly. We thank you for the powerful words that were provided for us, Father God. We thank you for providing the protection that we need every hour of the day. Father God, we thank you for our pastor and his wife. We thank you for all that thought it not robbery to join us this morning to hear this presentation. Father God, we ask you to bless the man that provided the information for us. Bless his family. Bless all of us as we depart from this presentation, but never from your loving kindness, Father God. We thank you right now in the mighty name of Jesus. Bless us all in a mighty way. This is your servant's prayer. In the mighty name of Jesus, we do pray. Amen. Amen. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, everybody. Everybody have a great day, and thank you, Stacy, and I will talk to everybody soon.
You're welcome. Thanks.